Desperation could be seen, written all over the faces of your adversaries as they frantically introduced documents into the fire. The flames continued to lick higher. They were under the impression that they were sophisticated and methodical in their efforts to erase every trace of their wrongdoings against you. Yet, they were unaware that eyes had already observed their deliberate brutality. In the shadows of their hubris, a silent observer had witnessed everything that had transpired, including the plotting, the sabotage, and the ruthless attempts to destroy everything that you had constructed. They were completely oblivious to the Holy Ledger, which contained a record of every single violation. Given that the cosmos had already moved, it was impossible for any amount of ash to erase what had been inscribed there. The process of justice was initiated by forces that are beyond the control of humans. Despite the fact that you, the Chosen One, may have endured pain in quiet, heaven's patience had completely run out. At this moment, an unseen hand was rebalancing the balances, which had been tipped against you for such a considerable amount of time. What your adversary failed to comprehend was something that was both straightforward and profound. Certain debts cannot be wiped, and certain witnesses cannot be silenced. In their ignorance, they believed that no one was observing them. They believed that their transgressions would vanish into the darkness, be consumed by silence, and be obliterated by fire. But the truth has eyes, and those eyes have witnessed everything. The witness, who was concealed in the shadows, stood motionless, with shallow breaths and a pounding heart, as they watched the adversaries burn the remaining vestiges of their treachery. In spite of the fact that the flames were consuming the evidence and dancing madly, the crime had already been done, and the witness had already witnessed too much. At first, they were overcome with terror. After all, who were they to speak up against such a dark force? The adversary was formidable, well-planned, and absolutely brutal. They had already caused a great deal of damage. What prevented them from putting an end to the utterance of one more voice? There was a secret that was too sacred to let go of, but it was also too hazardous to keep, and the witness felt the weight of the truth pressing heavily against his chest. They had two options. Either they could keep quiet and let injustice to fester, or they could take action and confront the storm. It was safe to remain unnoticed, to pretend that they had never been there, to walk away and let the fire burn, not just the evidence, but also the burden of duty. Silence was seductive. It was safe to pretend that they had never been there. They could have taken the path of least resistance, but something deep within them refused to give in. The truth does not vanish simply because it is ignored. It stays, whispering in the dark corners of the mind, growing heavier with each passing moment, and the witness could feel it, the gradual, suffocating weight of inaction crawling into their soul. The events that they had witnessed were played over and over again in their minds. The intentional damage, the smug assurance of the adversaries as they fed lie after lie into the flames, believing that they were untouchable. A witness kept their fists clenched tightly. In this case, justice was not the only issue at hand. Rather, it was about something more significant, something divine. You are here for a reason. If you feel the call, answer it. Click Join to unlock exclusive content, deep insights, and a powerful community. This isn't just a membership, it's an awakening. Step into your divine purpose. Join the chosen. Who else would go on to speak if they did not? What other party would be able to hold the wicked accountable if they did not take action? The choice did not come all at once. Rather, it was slow and unavoidable, unfolding like the morning breaking all around someone. Despite the fact that there would be repercussions, the regret that would follow would be much more severe than the dread. There was no way for them to ignore the fact that they had the ability to bring the truth into the light, but instead chose to allow evil to flourish. Now that the witness had seen, they would make sure that everyone else got the same impression. The question is, how can one expose evil without being the next target of that entity? The witness was aware that they needed to use caution. They could not immediately approach their adversaries and reveal their information. Doing so would be displaying a lack of intelligence. Not only did this call for precision, but it also demanded patience. The adversaries had committed a terrible error. They felt that they were the only ones responsible for their crime, and they believed that it had been annihilated in the flames. Furthermore, their haughtiness would prove to be their undoing. A witness would not behave in a hasty manner, but they would take action. The act of waiting, the act of accumulating strength, and the act of selecting the appropriate moment all possessed force. The adversaries had been operating under the premise that no one would challenge them. The witness would make sure that assumption cost them everything they had. They continued to exist in the shadows, unseen and unacknowledged for the time being. Nevertheless, this would not continue indefinitely. Truth cannot be buried. It does not sink, it does not burn, and it does not die. It just waits for its time. And the adversaries were running out of time that they could use to their advantage. They were under the impression that they had just one opportunity. The proof was vanished, being reduced to ash and dispersed by the wind. There was no trace left behind. At least that is what they persuaded themselves. They moved with a sense of superiority, certain that they had accomplished their goal of covering their traces and that their atrocities had been forgotten. In their minds, their heartbeat became more steady, their shoulders relaxed, and their lips curled into a smirk, reflecting their contentment. The threat had been eliminated. The individuals who had been selected had been silenced. The history had been rewritten. They congratulated themselves in private, raising a glass to their own ingenuity and laughing at the presumed ignorance of others whom they had duped. The way they walked was full of self-assurance. Their strides were light, and their voices were tinged with sarcasm. They were under the impression that they had outwitted fate itself, that they had manipulated destiny in their favor. They found solace in their deception, and their ignorance served as a shield for them. Nevertheless, what they failed to recognize was that the very thing that would bring about their demise was the erroneous sense of security that they had. They were under surveillance, despite the fact that they believed they were untouchable. They were under the impression that the truth had been destroyed, but it is still present in the atmosphere, in the recollections of those who witnessed evidence, in the holy record that cannot be changed. It is not possible for justice to sleep. It does not become disoriented or forget the screams of those who have been harmed. Moving with pinpoint accuracy, it is directed by a power that is beyond the comprehension of humans. Heaven's patience had run out, despite the fact that the selected ones may have endured their suffering in quiet. Now that the scales have been tipped, it is necessary to restore the balance, since the weight of every act of cruelty and every treachery had unbalanced them. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $20 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. The adversaries continued to take pleasure in the idea that they had won, while hands that were not visible to them had already began their job. Their victories were taken from them, and their success was predicated on lies. Additionally, the very forces that they had intended to manipulate were suddenly turning against them. However, crowns that have been stolen do not rest solidly on the head. Hence, what was obtained through treachery would be destroyed through the application of justice. Because the Lord is a God of justice, those who wait for him are blessed for their patience. It is not necessary for those who have been selected to take any action in order to exact revenge, because the edict had already been issued by the highest authority. Even though the adversaries would not be able to see it coming, the fall was unavoidable. They would be betrayed by the same power that they had expected to defend them, and the very lies that they had told would be revealed right in front of their very eyes. However, the divine hand, which never forgets, never ignores, and never allows the wicked to reign, would be the one to administer the punishment. It would not be handed down by mortal hands. As a result, those who had been selected waited for an indefinite amount of time, not out of fear or uncertainty, but with absolute conviction. The promise of justice was not a possibility. Rather, it was assured. In a short amount of time, the adversary would realize the consequences of their actions, and their time was running out. Their fate was already decided. They would have to pay the price. The adversaries were under the impression that they had accomplished their goal of covering their tracks. The fire devoured the documents, the lies that were buried, and the truth and silence wrapped around their crimes like an unbreakable chain. However, what they failed to recognize was that certain pieces of evidence cannot be destroyed, and that certain truths refuse to perish. A single detail that was overlooked, a whisper in the dark, or a record that they believed had been deleted, these were the imperfections that constituted the fissures in their foundation. What they had been trying to conceal began to emerge piece by piece, building a trail that went directly back to them. The destruction that they had so methodically choreographed began to work against them. Despite the fact that they were arrogant, they were unable to see their own errors because they believed they were brilliant. For example, it may have been a document that they failed to notice, a testimony that they failed to suppress, or a witness that they were unaware even existed. The error could have been something as insignificant as a timestamp, a signature that was misplaced, or a word that was spoken at the wrong time and in the wrong place. Regardless of how inconsequential it appeared to be, the unraveling had already begun, and there was nothing that could stop it at this point. They were unable to control the damage and were attempting to construct a fresh web of deception, but their efforts were fruitless. Panic began to set in. The more they struggled, the more entangled they became. Their self-assurance transformed into uncertainty, and their arrogance went into terror. They were able to get to the top by manipulating certain forces, but those same forces were now working against them. It was patient, waiting for the right moment to strike, and when it did not whisper. Rather, it roared. Truth was unrelenting. It was patient. At the same time that their empire of falsehoods was falling apart, the adversaries watched as the darkness that they had employed turned against them. Even though they believed they could alter history, they discovered that the past was not that simply forgotten. It was not necessary for the chosen individuals to swiftly take action. They did not have to compel justice to be carried out, because justice had already been established. The evidence that had been concealed was now coming to light on its own. The adversaries sealed their fate the moment they imagined they could avoid consequences for their actions. They were under the impression that they had triumphed. They believed that the truth had been eradicated. But the truth could not be eradicated, and it was now coming for them. The witness remained hidden for an excessively long period of time, clinging to a reality that was too burdensome to bear on their own. Despite the fact that silence is a prison, and the burden of knowing had become intolerable, they were overcome with terror. Terror of retaliation and anxiety of standing alone against those who were powerful had possessed them. The moment had arrived. They were no longer able to conceal themselves. The witness took a stride forward with unwavering determination, while their voice, which had been shaking before, now carried the weight of the truth. However, the adversaries had miscalculated and believed that fear would be sufficient to bury the past. They had banked on their silence to accomplish this. The witness had witnessed an excessive amount, and now the entire world as well. Their testimony was the turning point. The pieces started to fall into place. The lies started to unravel, and the adversary felt the walls closing in on them. Something that had been carefully concealed for a long time was now brought to light by the unforgiving light of the truth. The brave witness, who had been terrified in the past, stood unshaken now, knowing that their bravery had altered the path that justice and the adversaries would take. Now that they saw it, they realized that the proof they destroyed, the deception they fabricated, and the fear they relied on were completely insufficient. It was now impossible for anyone to stifle the truth, which had finally found its voice. This was the moment when the adversary experienced the change, the unraveling, and the unavoidable weight of consequence that was pressing down on them. It was as if they were tasting dust in their mouths now, which had once felt like victory. The authority that they held to had turned into a noose that was tightening around their own necks, and their lie, which had been created with such great care in the past, was falling apart at their feet. The situation became desperate, and they made frantic efforts to retake control, to fabricate fresh lies, and to stifle the voices that were rising up against them. But their efforts were fruitless. As a result of the witnesses' words, the chosen individuals had shifted their position, and the truth no longer yielded to their manipulation. When they turned around, doors were closing behind them. The same individuals who had previously stood by them in dread now retreated, unwilling to be pulled down with them. They had been under the impression that they were untouchable. They had laughed in the face of divine justice, certain that their transgressions had been burned away by the fire. However, what they failed to comprehend was that justice is not only a human invention, rather, it is a law that is woven into the very fabric of existence, and now that law requires payment. Some people shook their heads in dismay as they watched the enemy fall, while others quietly expressed their happiness with the outcome. This is the fate that awaits those who construct their kingdom on the foundation of falsehood. The collapse is never gradual or gentle. Rather, it begins abruptly, is unrelenting, and is unquestionable. This is not a case of tragedy. This is not a coincidence. Rather, this is the manifestation of karma, justice that has been long overdue, and there is no way to avoid it at this point. The payment would be made too late. You have persevered through it. You have endured wars that should have shattered you, endured betrayals that were meant to silence you, and walked through fire that was meant to consume you. And yet here you are, unshaken, unbeaten, and victorious. The adversary believed that they had triumphed. They believed that their machinations had eradicated you and that their deception had rewritten your tale. However, what they failed to see was that you were never intended to be destroyed. It was fated for you to succeed. In addition to demonstrating that no dark force, no deception, and no betrayal can take away what is truly yours. This victory is also about demonstrating that justice is not the only thing that matters. What is divinely assigned cannot be taken away from you, despite the fact that your adversaries imagined they could take everything away from you, including your voice, your strength, and your future. They attempted to bury you, but you were a seed. They attempted to quiet you, but your truth refused to be obliterated. And now, everything that they built on falsehoods has shattered beneath them, while you continue to rise tall. In no way was this about exacting revenge. You were not required to come up with a plan or to influence others. You were not required to beg for justice. In light of the fact that truth fights for itself, all you needed to do was maintain your position. Nothing that was taken away from you has been returned to you because you demanded it. Rather, everything has been returned to you because it was always intended to be yours. In spite of everything that has transpired, you have not lost sight of who you are. The scales have been balanced. The battle has been won. Every wound that they inflicted on you became a lesson, a stepping stone, and a mark of endurance. Every scar that you carry will serve as evidence of your incredible power. At first, they believed that they were destroying you, but in reality, they were simply purifying you. They were under the impression that you were losing, but you were simply getting ready. You are more than just a survivor. You are a warrior who has triumphed. You have demonstrated that patience is not a sign of weakness, that trust is not an indication of imprudence, and that justice, despite the fact that it may take some time, is unavoidable. Additionally, the adversary is currently observing from the ashes of their own demise, having come to the realization that you were never intended to fall. Because of their haughtiness, they were unable to see the reality of the situation, which was that you were always going to prevail, not by lying or by being desperate, but by persevering, being wise, and receiving heavenly favor. Not only have you triumphed over them, but you have also triumphed over uncertainty, fear, and every other external force that attempted to persuade you that you are not sufficient. With a sense of assurance, rather than vengeance, you have successfully restored your power. Indeed, you did not merely triumph, you triumphed. Your adversary was never the only thing at stake in this conflict. It was never just about their brutal behavior, their dishonesty, or their frantic efforts to cover up the truth. This was about you, your tenacity, your ability to bounce back from adversity, and your unwavering faith in spite of the challenges you confront. The purpose of every assault that was launched against you was to shatter you, but instead, it exposed who you really are. It is not true that you are weak, that you are powerless, or that you are at the mercy of those who plot in the shadows. Every failure served as a stepping stone to something more significant. Every betrayal was a lesson in discernment, and every delay served as a reminder that the timing of heavenly events is always divinely flawless. It is possible that justice will not always arrive when you anticipate it, but it will always arrive when it is intended to. Your foes were under the impression that they could influence the outcome, but in reality, they never had the last word. The suffering that they inflicted was genuine, but it was not long-lasting. Their authority was fleeting, and their successes were no more than illusions. However, you are constructed on something that will last forever. That is the reason you had to persevere. That is the reason you are still standing. That is the reason you have triumphed. Therefore, commit these teachings to memory. Having faith that when injustice is brought against you, it is only a matter of time before it is brought down is essential. It is important to keep in mind that you are not just anyone. You are chosen, protected, and destined for victory. Know that your silence in the face of hardship is not a sign of weakness, but rather of patience. This struggle was never just a fight, it was a demonstration of who you are, and you have already demonstrated that nothing can destroy you, regardless of how meticulously the evil plan is executed or how effectively they bury their tracks. Always, justice will find its way to them. The time is not on their side, despite the fact that they may be laughing now, confident that they have evaded judgment. Everything that is done in the shadows will eventually be brought to light. Everything that they have attempted to conceal will come back to haunt them. And when the time comes for them to answer for their actions, no amount of power, no lie, and no deception will be sufficient to save them. This reality has been shown to you right in front of your very eyes. You have persevered through the examinations, experienced the burden of injustice, and witnessed your adversaries believing that they had triumphed. But take a look at where you are now. Their laughter has turned into silence. Their confidence has collapsed into terror. And the same plots that they constructed have become the instruments that have led to their destruction. Reason being, justice is not an illusion. Rather, it is a law that cannot be broken and is unquestionable. Your assistance is not required for it to take action, and it does not require authorization to move. When the time is ripe, justice arrives like a storm. It is rapid and unquestionable, and it brings with it the consequences that were always going to be inescapable. As a result, you do not have to seek retribution. You do not have to bring yourself down to the same level as those who attempted to ruin you. Your resilience has never been a result of vengeance. Rather, it has been of endurance. Despite the fact that your adversaries have been defeated, you have already achieved victory. This is not only due to the fact that you have not given in to the darkness that attempted to swallow you. Allow this to serve as a lesson to you. Those who are wicked may take flight, but they cannot conceal themselves. They may plot, but they cannot get away. And as for you, the ones who have been selected, you will always rise, unharmed and victorious. Justice has come out on top, and it will continue to do so.